The broad head, the compact chest, and the almost elastic energy of the Staffordshire Bull Terrier have always led many to believe the breed had a simple, obvious history. But the DNA suggests otherwise. What researchers found wasn't a clean, easy-to-tell lineage, but a trail of selective breeding that hides more than it reveals. And it is exactly this fracture between appearance and heritage that makes everything more unsettling. Because when the first layer falls, the question changes. It no longer matters only where the breed came from. It matters who decided it should be this way, which crosses were kept, which were discarded, and why the official history survived for so long without being challenged. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier remains the same before the camera, but what sustains that image no longer seems the same. In the end, the strangest thing is not discovering that there was a mix. It is realizing how much a well-known breed could seem simple for so long, while the DNA pointed to a much more intentional, more recent and more human origin than any superficial description lets see. We've been told the Staffordshire Bull Terrier has a simple, ancient lineage, but when researchers finally mapped the breed's DNA, the results were shocking. It wasn't the pure, untouched history we expected, but a calculated, brutal 19th century invention. Today, we're breaking down exactly what the genomic data reveals about the true origins of this breed, and why it changes everything you thought you knew about your dog. If you're fascinated by the science behind our dogs, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're diving deep into the genetics that define our companions. That detail changes the whole feeling of the breed. Because once the place is named, the landscape stops being decorative. Birmingham was not just a backdrop. It was part of an industrial belt where hardship, labor, and rough entertainment moved close together. Staffordshire was not a romantic homeland. It was the ground on which selection happened with a clear objective. The dog was expected to be compact, steady, and relentless. Not beautiful in the way showlines would later define beauty. Useful, durable, controlled by human hands. The first records of this ancestry do not point to a single noble family or an ancient, untouched line. They point to crossbreeding. Bulldogs brought power, terriers brought speed and tenacity, and the blend was kept because it served a very specific demand in the 19th century. That is the unsettling part. The breed's identity was built from decisions, not from accident. Every chosen trait carried the weight of a preference made by people who wanted a fighting dog and understood exactly what had to be mixed to get one. And yet, for years, that origin could be flattened into a cleaner story. A compact dog, broad in the chest, stable in the face, confident in the body. All of it could be described as if it had simply emerged that way. But the historical trail says otherwise. It says the Staffordshire Bull Terrier came out of a region where breeding was practical, local, and ruthlessly selective. It says the look we recognize today was earned through deliberate pairing, not inherited intact from some distant past. That is why the genetic findings land with such force. They do not merely add a scientific footnote to an old breed. They expose the machinery behind the myth. The dog's shape, its grip, its balance, even the temperament people later praised or feared, were being pulled into place by human choice in a very specific corner of England. The north of Birmingham and the Black Country were not just where the breed lived. They were where it was built. So the contradiction deepens instead of disappearing. The body in front of us still looks immediate, familiar, almost self-evident. But the history behind it is anything but simple. A dog that now reads as a single identity was once the product of competing needs, rough local culture, and a breeder's eye trained to keep only what worked. That is where the tension shifts. Not from what the dog is, but from how thoroughly people shaped it before history ever tried to explain it. In 2017, a comprehensive genomic study analyzed bull and terrier crosses, tracing their roots back to Irish terriers between 1860 and 1870, confirming historical accounts. This is where the earlier certainty starts to crack. A breed often treated as if it emerged from one fixed place, and one fixed purpose now appears to carry a deeper inheritance, one that crosses local assumptions and exposes a much wider human pattern of selection. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier did not simply appear fully formed from a single neighborhood's need. What the genetic evidence hints at is a chain of choices, carried forward through dogs chosen for function, resilience, and the traits people kept repeating because they worked. The effect is unsettling in a quiet way. The familiar outline of the Staffordshire Bull Terrier still stands there, compact and powerful, but the line that built it no longer looks as simple as the old explanations made it sound. A study published in 2017 does more than add another reference point. It shifts the center of gravity. It suggests that the story begins farther back, in a broader pool of terrier ancestry, where Irish dogs may have supplied the foundation for an entire family of bull and terrier breeds. And once that possibility is on the table, the breed's history stops behaving like a straight road. It becomes a record of transmission, refinement, and repeated selection, with each generation preserving only what the next human hand decided to keep. Even the way the Staffordshire Bull Terrier reads today changes under that light. Its strength no longer seems like a simple inherited constant. Its stability, its balance, its compact frame all begin to look like the visible residue of a much longer experiment. The surprising part is not only that the DNA pointed elsewhere, it is that the evidence gave the breed a more precise beginning than the traditional version ever could. That precision leaves less room for comfortable myths. It means the ancestry of the Staffordshire Bull Terrier was never a single clean line, but a deeper weave of terriers, selection, and practical breeding decisions that reached across time before anyone could describe them with confidence. The closer the genetic picture comes into focus, the more the old explanation slips away, and what remains is a much harder truth. This animal carries the marks of human intent in every layer of its origin. By the time the breed reached formal recognition, the debate around its origin was already carrying more weight than a simple pedigree story. In 1935, the Kennel Club in Britain officially recognized the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and that mattered because it marked a turning point. The animal was no longer just a working dog shaped by local habit and selective breeding, but a breed with a defined place in the record. The name, the standards, the identity they had been forming in practice all began to harden into something public and official. That recognition did not erase the tangled path that came before it. It confirmed that the breed had moved beyond informal use and into institutional memory, where appearance, temperament, and function could be described with the same seriousness as lineage. A dog once judged by the work it could do, and the character it showed now had a formal frame around it. And that frame was built after the deeper mixing, after the deliberate crosses, after the long human pressure that had already shaped its body and behavior. Then the story crossed the Atlantic and gained another layer of legitimacy. In 1974, the American Kennel Club accepted the Staffordshire Bull Terrier as its 121st official breed. That number sounds dry at first, but it carries a quiet force. It means the breed had not only survived the passage of time, it had been recognized in a second national context, far from the streets and breeding yards where its form had been forged. By then, the dog had become something more stable than rumor, and more visible than local tradition. What makes that sequence so striking is the order in which things happened. The biological history came first. The cultural use came next. The formal recognition arrived later, almost like a seal pressed onto a story that had already been written through generations of choice. The Kennel Club's 1935 recognition and the AKC's 1974 acceptance did not create the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, but they confirmed that the breed had earned an official identity after years of being shaped by human hands. And that is where the picture sharpens. The breed's official status was not the beginning of its truth. It was the moment that truth became impossible to ignore. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier had already been assembled by selection, purpose, and adaptation long before any registry gave it a place on paper. The records simply caught up with what breeding history had been saying all along. This was a dog built through intention, then finally acknowledged by institutions that had no choice but to name what was already there. In 1978, the first warning came from veterinary ophthalmologist Dr. Keith Barnett. His seminal paper, Hereditary Cataract in the Dog, definitively described hereditary cataracts in the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, a condition later linked to an HSF4 gene mutation. That mattered because the earlier story had already started to look too neat. If the breed's ancestry was a mosaic of selected crosses, then its health could not be treated like a simple side note. The body was keeping score. Eyes, in particular, became a kind of archive. A dog might look steady, confident, and physically compact, yet still carry a vulnerability hidden in the same lines that gave it strength. The finding did not erase the breed's hard-won identity. It made that identity more costly, more human, and far less romantic. Barnett's observation also did something else. It moved the discussion away from legend and toward consequence. Once hereditary cataracts were described in 1978, the question was no longer only where the Staffordshire Bull Terrier came from. It was what kind of selection had been repeated long enough to leave a mark in the tissue itself. When a trait can be traced through clinical signs, the history stops feeling abstract. It becomes physical. It becomes something a breeder, a veterinarian, and an owner can confront in the same room, under the same light. The Canine Genetics Center's account makes that turning point clear. The breed's health did not sit outside its ancestry. It helped reveal it. The same forces that had shaped the Staffordshire Bull Terrier into a compact, powerful companion also shaped the risks it could carry. In that sense, the eyes became a document no registry could rewrite. They showed that selection was never only about producing a familiar outline. It was also about deciding which hidden costs would pass forward with it. And once that truth appears, the whole breed feels different. A Staffordshire Bull Terrier is no longer just a familiar silhouette or a symbol of toughness. It is the result of choices that reached all the way into the body's private mechanics. A dog that can inherit a cataract is a dog whose past did not stay in the past. It traveled forward, quietly, until a clinician named it. That is why the 1978 description feels so important. It was not a footnote. It was proof that the history uncovered by DNA had a second language, written in illness, inheritance, and observation. The breed's origin story was already more complex than anyone expected. Barnett's work showed that its biological legacy was not only about where it came from, but about what that journey left behind. To understand how to protect your own dog from these inherited risks, check the link in the description for our full health guide. It covers everything we're discussing today in detail. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier still stands with the same compact frame, the same alert expression, the same unmistakable presence. But after this layer of evidence, those features no longer look simple. They look earned, edited, and in some cases, burdened. The breed carries more than memory in its line. It carries consequences. And the most unsettling part is that the clues were there all along, waiting in the eyes. By 2024, the search had changed shape. It was no longer only about where the Staffordshire Bull Terrier had been born in the past. It had become a live effort, carried out in the present tense, with breeders and researchers working side by side to understand inherited disease and build DNA tests that could help future litters. That shift matters, because it means the story was no longer trapped inside ancestry charts and museum logic. It had entered kennels, clinics, and the daily decisions of people who live with these dogs. The Canine Genetics Center put that collaboration into focus in 2024, describing how the Staffordshire Bull Terrier community had become part of the search for answers. The goal was practical, not ceremonial. Identify the mutations, track the risks, turn a hidden vulnerability into something a test can catch before suffering becomes routine. In that setting, DNA stopped being a cold archive of origin and started behaving like a tool of prevention. The breed's future health was being read through the same molecule that had already rewritten its past. That is what makes this stage of the investigation so unsettling in a different way. At first, the surprise was that the Staffordshire Bull Terrier was not as simple as its legend. Then came the discovery that its roots were more mixed, more deliberate, and more human than the familiar story allowed. Now the surprise is even sharper. The people who care for these dogs are helping expose the consequences of that history in real time. Selection did not end when the breed was recognized and stabilized. It kept echoing forward, hidden inside disorders that only modern testing could trace. The collaboration also says something about trust. A community that once might have been treated only as keepers of type and temperament is now part of the scientific process. That means the Staffordshire Bull Terrier is not being studied from a distance. It is being followed with the help of the people who know its body, its limits, and the small warning signs that can be missed by anyone who looks too quickly. In other words, the breed is no longer just an object of inquiry. It has become a partner in its own explanation, and that adds a new layer to everything that came before. The compact chest, the powerful jaw, the alert expression, even the intense loyalty that people notice first in a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, now sit beside a quieter truth. Some of the most important clues are invisible until science and experience meet. A dog can look fearless and still carry a line of risk inside its blood. A breeder can admire a trait and still need a test to understand its cost. The modern work around this breed makes that tension impossible to ignore. The Canine Genetics Center's 2024 article does not just extend the timeline, it changes the direction of the story. What started as an effort to untangle Ancestry has become a project of care, where DNA is used to protect the next generation instead of merely describe the last one. That is why the Staffordshire Bull Terrier now feels larger than a breed history. It is a living example of how human selection leaves traces long after the original choices are forgotten, and how those traces can be read, challenged, and sometimes softened by the same science that first exposed them. In 2022, the next clue landed in a place few would expect. Not in the skull, not in the muscle, not in the visible outline of a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, but in the quiet code that sits between genes. Researchers linked non-coding variation in the canine genome to behavioral traits across several breeds, and that detail changed the temperature of the whole inquiry. What had looked like a discussion about ancestry alone suddenly touched something harder to pin down. Why do some dogs read the world with more steadiness, others with more caution, and others with a flash of intensity that seems almost written into the body? The National Human Genome Research Institute pointed to those non-coding regions as part of the answer. They do not build proteins in the direct way most people imagine when they hear the word DNA, yet they help steer how genes are used. In dogs, that matters. A shift in timing, in regulation, in when and where a gene is active, can leave a mark on temperament without leaving a dramatic mark on appearance. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier, with its compact frame and unmistakable alertness, becomes a useful lens for that kind of science, because its outward identity feels so decisive. The face looks certain. The temperament is where the uncertainty begins. Then the Broad Institute added another layer in the same year. Its conclusion was blunt in a way that made the result even more unsettling. Most behavioral traits are heritable, but behavior only differentiates subtly between breeds. That sentence cuts against the lazy idea that a breed is a sealed box of instincts. It says something more nuanced and more difficult. Heredity matters, yes, but it does not act like a switch. It behaves more like a dimmer, shaping tendencies while leaving room for environment, training, and the long pressure of human selection. For the Staffordshire Bull Terrier, that distinction matters deeply. A dog, bred through deliberate crosses and later refined into a recognizable type, cannot be understood only through the shape of its head or the density of its body. The behavioral profile, too, carries history. Not a fixed script, but a set of leanings. The willingness to engage, the capacity for focus, the steadiness that some owners describe as almost stubborn patience, and the spark that can appear as confidence under stress. Those qualities do not arrive from a single source, and they do not stay still from one generation to the next. That is what made the 2022 findings so powerful. They did not flatten the breed into biology, and they did not hand psychology over to fate. Instead, they revealed a narrower but sharper truth. Behavior in dogs is inherited in part, but the differences between breeds are often more delicate than the public expects. In other words, the Staffordshire Bull Terrier is not a simple case of nature writing a complete instruction manual. It is a case of layered inheritance, where DNA sets a range and human choices narrow it, redirect it, and sometimes exaggerate it. Seen from that angle, the earlier genetic ancestry no longer feels like the end of the investigation. It feels like the beginning of the real one. The question is no longer only where the breed was assembled, but how its internal tendencies were shaped while that assembly was taking place. A dog can inherit a body plan and still surprise the hand that raises it. A population can carry behavioral leanings and still remain far more flexible than the stereotype suggests. That tension is where the Staffordshire Bull Terrier becomes most revealing, not as a symbol of certainty, but as proof that identity in animals is built from probabilities, pressures, and choices that echo long after the first breeding decisions are forgotten. And because of that, the old habit of reading temperament as destiny starts to crack. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier does not simply confirm what tradition says about breed character, it shows how much of that character is assembled, not merely received. The science from 2022 does not reduce the dog. It makes the dog more complex, and in that complexity more human than the labels ever allowed. By the time the final layer of evidence comes into view, the Staffordshire Bull Terrier no longer looks like a breed with a simple beginning. It looks like the result of pressure, intention, and revision. The old image of a clean lineage gives way to something far less tidy. A dog shaped by selective breeding, by inherited tendencies, and by generations of human decisions that kept changing the direction of its body and its mind. What seemed like a fixed identity starts to read like a record of choices made over time. In 2022, research led by the National Human Genome Research Institute, published in Cell, Dutrow et al. 2022, identified that non-coding regulatory variations are the primary drivers of behavioral diversification. That is why the most recent work matters so much. In 2022, research associated with the National Human Genome Research Institute pointed to non-coding variation in the dog genome as a factor linked to behavioral differences across multiple breeds. Around the same time, a separate 2022 analysis from the Broad Institute concluded that most behavioral traits are heritable, yet behavior only separates the breeds in subtle ways. Those findings matter here because they pull the Staffordshire Bull Terrier away from the old temptation to treat temperament as a stamp pressed into place once and for all. Instead, they show a living pattern. Inheritance matters, selection matters, and the final expression is never as blunt as the label suggests. That is the part that changes everything. The breed was never just a mechanical mixture of bulldogs and terriers frozen into a single form. It was refined, narrowed, preserved, and interpreted by people who wanted specific results. Then genetics came along and exposed how much of that process was still visible in the dog itself. A powerful chest, a compact frame, a steady face, a quick response to the world around it. All of it now appears less like a mystery of nature and more like a ledger of human purpose written into flesh. Even the health studies, the historical crossbreeds, and the later recognition of the breed point toward the same conclusion. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier is not a line that runs straight from one origin to one destiny. It is a breed built through convergence. The genes trace that convergence back farther and more unevenly than tradition allowed, and the modern behavioral research shows that the results of that shaping remain present without becoming absolute. In other words, the breed is inherited, but it is also assembled. That is why the research shocked so many observers. It did more than correct a date or adjust a family tree. It broke open the illusion that a breed must have a neat origin to have a meaningful identity. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier carries the marks of crossbreeding, selection, adaptation, and later scientific scrutiny all at once. Its ancestry is real precisely because it is complicated. If this deep dive into the Staffordshire Bull Terrier's history changed how you see your own dog, let me know in the comments. Which part surprised you the most? And in the end, that is what makes the dog so compelling. The face people think they know belongs to a history they did not fully see. Beneath it is a story of human ambition, genetic inheritance, and a temperament shaped in ways that remain subtle, durable, and deeply alive. The Staffordshire Bull Terrier stands there now, not as a simplified symbol, but as proof that identity in animals is often built in layers, and that the truth, once uncovered, can make a familiar breed feel